Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. The United Nations says civilian casualties in Afghanistan have escalated sharply after peace talks began last year. In an annual report, the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan said record-high casualties were reported in the last 3 months of 2020. Meanwhile, the Taliban have rejected the report that blamed the group for most of the deadly incidents. It comes as negotiators from the Afghan government and Taliban met in Doha for the first time after weeks of hiatus. The group of 7 rich countries say the use of violence against people protesting against a coup in Myanmar is unacceptable. In a joint statement, the G7 foreign ministers said the perpetrators must be held to account. Earlier, the United States imposed sanctions on Myanmar's military's 2 generals for their role in the coup. The US says Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's comments on uranium enrichment sounds like a threat. In a statement, the State Department spokesperson reiterated the US willingness to engage in talks with Tehran about returning to the 2015 nuclear deal. Earlier, Khamenei said Iran might enrich uranium up to 60% purity if needed and would never yield to US pressure. The number of COVID-19 deaths in the US has crossed 500,000, while its caseload tops 28.1 million. President Joe Biden observed a moment of silence to commemorate the deaths. The United Nations says civilian casualties in Afghanistan have escalated sharply after peace talks began last year. In an annual report, the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan said record-high casualties were reported in the last 3 months of 2020. It said for a 7th consecutive year, UNAMA documented more than 3,000 civilians killed in a single year in Afghanistan. The mission reported 30% of casualties were children, while 13% were women. The Taliban have rejected the report that blamed the group for most of the deadly incidents. In a statement, the group said its concerns, information and details have not been taken up in the report. It comes as negotiators from the Afghan government and Taliban met in Doha for the first time after weeks of hiatus. Now, a US-based NGO committee to protect journalists has asked New Delhi to drop investigations into work of 3 Kashmiri journalists. This comes after the Indian administration in occupied Kashmir opened criminal investigations into journalists for alleged incitement. In a statement, it said journalists Yashraj Sharma, Mir Junaid and Sajjad Gul should be allowed to do their jobs without harassment. It said Indian authorities must stop targeting journalists because of their reporting. A police case has been registered against Sajjad Gul for reporting the demolition drive in Bandipora district. Earlier, a court rejected Shah and Sharma's petition for preemptive bail. Now in India, the protesting farmers have announced to intensify their agitation against the government's contentious farm laws. The growers have also begun a series of events to mark similar protests against the anti-farm laws by the British government in 1907. Congress leader Priyanka Gandhi will also be attending a farmers' meeting in Uttar Pradesh state today. The union say they will make their future line of action public on the 28th of February. Meanwhile, a Delhi court will pronounce the verdict on Disha Ravi's bail plea today. She has been arrested for sharing a toolkit on social media related to the ongoing farmers' protest. Now, a group of 7 rich countries say the use of violence against people protesting against a coup in Myanmar is unacceptable. In a joint statement, the G7 foreign ministers said the perpetrators must be held accountable. The United States has also imposed sanctions on the Myanmar's military's 2 generals for their role in the coup. In a statement, the U.S. Treasury Department warned of further action if the military does not urgently restore democracy in Myanmar. Earlier, the European Union also approved sanctions on Myanmar's military. Meanwhile, Myanmar's army has threatened to withdraw licenses of the media outlets for using the word coup. Pro-democracy protests continue in Myanmar to seek reversal of the coup and the release of Aung San Suu Kyi. Moving on now, the US says Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's comments on uranium enrichment sounds like a threat. In a statement, the State Department spokesperson reiterated US's willingness to engage in talks with Tehran about returning to the 2015 nuclear deal. However, spokesman Ned Price said Tehran has not responded formally to the earlier talks offer. Earlier, Khamenei said Iran might enrich uranium up to 60% purity if needed. Speaking to the Assembly of Experts, Khamenei said Iran will never yield to US pressure over its nuclear program. Now, this came as Iran ended the implementation of additional protocols to carry out snap inspections at nuclear sites not declared to the IAEA. Now, the US says it holds Iran responsible for a rocket attack that targeted the US embassy in Iraq's capital, Baghdad. A State Department spokesperson said Washington will not lash out in response. Iraq's defense ministry said 3 rockets were fired at Baghdad's heavily fortified green zone. It said the attack caused minor property damage, including damage to 4 civilian vehicles. No one has claimed responsibility for the attack so far. Earlier, a rocket attack killed a civilian contractor working with the US-led coalition outside Erbil International Airport. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has stressed the importance of a 2-state solution for Israeli-Palestinian peace. The State Department said Blinken held a telephonic conversation with his Israeli counterpart. In a statement, the department said Blinken said the 2-state solution is best for Israel's future as a Jewish and democratic state. It said Blinken stressed the importance of Israel's peaceful coexistence alongside a viable and democratic Palestinian state. It added the secretary addressed the U.S. approach towards a more peaceful future for Israelis, Palestinians and the greater Middle East. Moving on, Turkey says 2 Syrian soldiers have been killed in a PKK rocket attack in Syria's Tal Abyad district of Raqqa province. The governor's office in Turkey's Şanlıurfa province near Syria border said 7 soldiers were injured in the attack. It said terrorists attacked the army's checkpoint in the town of Ain Isa with a heat-seeking rocket. It added the local authorities have launched an investigation into the attack in coordination with the Şanlıurfa governorate. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has left for Sri Lanka on a 2-day official visit on the invitation of his Lankan counterpart. This will be the Prime Minister's first visit to Colombo since assuming office in 2018. The Prime Minister will be accompanied by federal ministers and senior officials. The Foreign Office says Khan will also meet President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The bilateral talks will cover key regional and international issues as well as matters concerning the trade and defense. Khan will also participate in a joint trade and investment conference. A number of memorandums of understandings will also be signed during the visit to enhance bilateral cooperation. Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported 41 deaths and 1,050 coronavirus infections over the past 24 hours. This has pushed the country's death toll to 12,658. The Health Ministry said so far over 573,000 people across the country contracted the virus, out of which more than 536,000 have recovered. The ministry said there are more than 24,000 active cases in the country. It said out of over 2,000 patients admitted in hospital, 1,616 are in critical condition. Meanwhile, the number of COVID-19 deaths in the US has crossed 500,000, while the caseload tops 28 million. Globally, the virus has claimed 2.4 million lives and infected over 111 million people so far. More in this report.
Bells tolled at the National Cathedral in Washington to honor the 500,000 lives lost to COVID-19. President Joe Biden observed a moment of silence to commemorate the deaths. Biden ordered the U.S. flag to be flown at half-mast on public buildings and grounds until sunset on Friday. The president also urged Americans to set aside partisan differences and fight the pandemic together.
I also ask us to act, to remain vigilant, to stay socially distanced, to mask up, get vaccinated when it's your turn. We must end the politics and misinformation that's divided families, communities, in the country. And it's cost too many lives already.
The situation in Europe is not much different as COVID-19 hospitalizations in France continue to surge. However, the British government data has shown a 70% decline in infections after the first Pfizer vaccine shot. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has unveiled a plan to gradually ease curbs. He warned that it can be sustainable only if the UK's vaccine rollout continues seamlessly. But Johnson's chief scientific advisor believes it is too early to be talking about absolute normalcy.
It's possible that coming into next winter, in particular, certain things may be necessary. And Tony Fauci yesterday said in the US that he thought that things like masks may be needed next winter. And I think we're in the same position, that it may be necessary next winter to have things like mask wearing in certain situations.
Australia is set to ramp up its immunization drive with more shots rolled out from next week. Meanwhile, a study has found that people's sense of smell and taste may not return for up to 5 months after contracting coronavirus.
Well, now the U.S. Supreme Court has ordered former President Donald Trump to hand over his tax returns to New York City prosecutors. This ends Trump's 18-month quest to conceal the details of his finances. The judges rejected Trump's request to block an earlier ruling by a lower court that said the records were pertinent to a criminal probe. Responding to the decision in a statement, Trump called the inquiry a politically motivated attack by New York Democrats and a continuation of the greatest political witch hunt in U.S. history. He said the Supreme Court should never let this finishing expedition happen. More news coming up in this news bulletin, but after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's move on with the news stories. Moscow says the European Union's planned sanctions against Russia are unlawful and a cause for disappointment. Earlier, EU foreign ministers agreed to impose sanctions on 4 Russian officials involved in jailing Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. In a statement, the Russian Foreign Ministry said Brussels had missed an opportunity to change its course with regards to Moscow. It added the EU again instinctively has pushed the inoperative sanctions button. The ministry said, defying logic, first a political decision is made and then it is planned to arbitrarily find candidates for it. The ministry said it is typical that the EU global human rights sanctions regime will be used against Russians. Now, Georgia's parliament has elected a new prime minister, Irakli Garibashvili, and the cabinet he put forward. Former Premier Georgi Gakharia resigned on Thursday over a court ruling to arrest the top opposition politician. 89 of the 150-seat parliament voted for Garibashvili and his cabinet. Garibashvili previously served as the prime minister between 2013 and 2015. In his address to the parliament, the newly elected prime minister ruled out the opposition's demand for a rerun of the vote. Garibashvili said the opposition wants a violent change of a government. That is why they are out of the constitutional framework. Now, U.S. authorities have arrested the wife of a Mexican drug cartel's former chief, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. The Justice Department says Emma Coronel Aispuro was held over her alleged involvement in international drug trafficking. In a statement, the department said Coronel was arrested at Dulles International Airport in Northern Virginia. The statement read, she is scheduled to virtually appear in federal court later today. Authorities say the 31-year-old was charged with conspiring to distribute drugs for unlawful importation into the U.S. Additionally, she is alleged to have conspired with others to assist Guzman in his July 11, 2015 escape from a prison in Mexico. Now, Guzman was convicted in February 2019 of trafficking tons of drugs and engaging in multiple murder conspiracies. Now, in the U.S. state of Texas, nearly 8 million people are still facing water shortage after the record-breaking freeze knocked out power stations last week. Officials say more than 1,200 public water systems reported service disruptions. They say 147 water systems and 4 wastewater treatment facilities are still non-operational. Authorities have advised people to boil water before drinking. Earlier, Texas Governor Greg Abbott joined state and federal authorities in distributing 3.5 million bottles of water. Extreme cold weather has claimed dozens of lives and prompted a major disaster declaration for Texas. Now, Brazil's northwestern state of Acre has declared a state of emergency as torrential rains lash the region. The rains have brought intense flooding and affected more than 120,000 people. TV footage from the Acre showed rain-swollen rivers, flooded streets and residents going around in boats in the floodwaters. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro has also visited the region on the border with Peru. More than 6,000 residents have been displaced by the flooding in Acre, which is home to about 895,000 people. The state is also grappling with outbreaks of dengue and COVID-19. Now, Facebook says it will restore Australian news pages after negotiating changes to a proposed law that will force the tech giant to pay for media content. Canberra has agreed to amend the mechanism for final offer arbitration, among 3 others. Talking to reporters in Canberra, Treasurer Josh said Facebook has refriended Australia. He added Facebook will enter into negotiations with news outlets to strike agreements.
Well, Facebook has refriended Australia, and Australian news will be restored to the Facebook platform. And Facebook has committed to entering into good faith negotiations with Australian news media businesses in seeking to reach agreements to pay for content.
Meanwhile, Facebook says it will retain the ability to decide if news appears on its platform. Now, NASA has released a video captured by Mars Rover Perseverance during its landing on the surface of the red planet. Scientists have isolated and slowed down parts of the video and audio to explain the first sights and sounds captured by the spacecraft. More about the red planet in this report.
Thanks to NASA, we now have the first ever video of landing on Mars' surface. The self-guided descent and landing stand as the most elaborate and challenging feat in the annals of robotic spaceflight. The 3-minute video shows Perseverance landing in a swirl of sand as rocks are kicked up from the surface by the rover's rocket engines. 5 cameras located on 3 different components of the spacecraft collected the footage.
It gives me goosebumps every time I see it. Just amazing. I hope everybody kept their hands and arms inside the vehicle at all times while it was in motion.
The 6-wheeled vehicle came to rest about 2 kilometers from towering cliffs at the foot of a remnant of a fan-shaped river delta. The delta is at the corner of a crater that is considered a prime spot for geobiological study on Mars. Scientists hope to find biosignatures in sediments that Perseverance is designed to extract from Mars for future analysis back on Earth.
We have our coring drill in the center, our Pixel and Sherlock instruments mounted to the side, and that black tank is to support the gas dust removal tool, which will remove dust from the surfaces that we will be inspecting later.
Perseverance sailed through space for nearly 7 months, covering 293 million miles before reaching Mars. It entered the atmosphere of the red planet at 12,000 miles per hour to begin its descent to the planet's surface.
Well, now, rollerblades are not just for recreation now. as Pakistan's police force will be hopping on them to catch criminals. More in this report.
Skating in a circle with their weapons pointed inwards, these members of the Karachi police are not having fun, but they're getting ready to patrol the narrow streets and alleys of Pakistan's port city. A special rollerblade squad of 20 weapon-wielding men and women has been formed by the Karachi police. The idea is to increase the mobility and accessibility of police in places where vehicles are difficult to operate.
We felt we needed to come up with some innovative approach to control street crime in Karachi. We analyzed and saw there are certain spots where crime incidents, say for example mobile snatching, are more frequent. We also saw that criminals use motorcycles that help them run away easily. At times it is difficult for police teams to chase them from our vehicles.
Police officials say the skating force will be sent to public places with a higher incidence of theft and harassment. The rigorous training for the newly armed rollerblading unit has been taking place for over a month.
At the moment, this is a beginning, but I feel through proper training, we will be able to curb crime in the future. This will benefit us as we can reach narrow alleys very quickly where it was usually difficult to reach before.
Amid safety concerns, the squad would only be carrying handguns to reduce the risk of bullets recoiling.
Well, now a clip of a tractor shaking orange trees in Spain has gained thousands of retweets and likes on social media. But on the streets of orange-producing Valencia, it seems less out of the ordinary. This report has details.
What's amusing for others is a common occurrence in Valencia, where tractors intensively shake trees and catch the bitter oranges in giant plastic nets. There are 12,000 such trees across the city, and between 350 and 400 tons of oranges are taken each year.
People often ask us, what are you going to do with the oranges? If they were good, they would not be on the tree. Or they ask, can we take them? Are they fit for consumption? So there are many very different situations in the day-to-day of what is happening to us.
Bitter oranges hanging from the trees are not fit for human consumption, and the picked up fruits are destined to make compost. While the annual orange picking campaign takes place, some residents continue to be amused.
People go with their mobile phone and we are working on the street. People are talking on WhatsApp and suddenly they bump into the tractor and you have to be stopping people, telling them to be careful with the tractor.
One member of the pickup brigade, Vicente Jimenez, is not surprised by people's confusion, but says they need to look where they are going and avoid bumping into the tractors.
Now in Poland, a zoo is celebrating the birth of a bear cuscus after successfully breeding the marsupial species. According to Polish zookeepers, these are one of the rarest and least known species on Earth. Let's find out in this report.
The birth of the bear cuscus was a huge success, which has confirmed that the species could be saved from extinction. Bear cuscus, native to the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, have dark fur, sharp claws and a prehensile tail. The bear cuscus is the fourth baby the zoo has bred and currently has two adult bear cuscus called Duza and Garrett.
At the moment, we have a couple of these bears. This is male called Garrett, he's the darker one, and a female called Duza, she's a little bit lighter. Plus you can see a tiny little tail sticking out here, and that's a tiny baby. It's the fourth one born at our zoological garden.
The bear cuscus, whose sex is yet to be confirmed, was born last July and has had to survive in the mother's pouch. Months later, it began to leave the pouch and was seen last week holding onto its mother's back at the zoo's indoor enclosure. The International Union for Conservation of Nature has described the animals as vulnerable.
Unfortunately, we don't know much about them. We don't know how many of them are alive. We know one thing, it is a very endangered animal. They are slow, they don't hide, they live on exposed tree branches. It is the only cuscus species that is active during the day. The others have nocturnal lifestyle, that much we already know.
Currently, only 14 bear cuscus live in captivity in 4 zoos across the globe, most of them kept away from the public eye.
Now, British luxury label Burberry has released its autumn-winter 2021 collection focused on menswear. Burberry's Ricardo Tisci says the dream of exploration, a freedom denied during COVID-19 lockdowns, inspired the collection.
British luxury label Burberry has released its Autumn-Winter 2021 collection focused on menswear. Burberry's Ricardo Tisci says that the dream of exploration, a freedom denied during COVID-19 lockdowns, inspired the collection. Outerwear was a focus of the new designs showcased at Burberry's flagship Regent Street store in central London. In a press release, Tisci said that the collection was inspired by the British craft and outdoor movements of the early 20th century. Burberry's traditional trenches were reimagined with pleats, panels, and fringes in the new collection. The color palette centered on tonal shades of beige, dark brown, oxblood burgundy, and city grays. Tisci's designs have attracted new, younger customers, particularly in the Chinese market. Like other labels, Burberry has been hit hard by global restrictions on shop opening and travel and tourism. The company has said it is confident of rebounding as the pandemic eases.
Now, European stocks are trading low as investors focus on coronavirus developments and economic recovery prospects. London's FTSE, at least FTSE MIB and the CAC 40 in Paris have all lost fractionally. Meanwhile, Europe's stock 600 and Frankfurt's DAX health also slipped around 0.5%. Earlier, Asian bourses traded mixed with Chinese and South Korean stocks down. Now in the Pakistan Super League, Peshawar Zalmi will face Multan Sultans today at National Stadium, Karachi. Both teams are equally balanced and are aiming to register their maiden win in the contest. The toss will be crucial as the conditions at National Stadium have so far favoured the chasing side. Earlier, Fakhar Zaman and Mohammad Hafiz led Lahore Qalandars to a thumping 9-wicket win over Quetta Gladiators. Half-centuries by both top-ordered batsmen helped Qalandars reach the target with 10 balls to spare. Zaman was declared player of the match for his stellar knock of 82 runs. And now let's have a look at the weather updates around the world. Now we'll take you live to Colombo, where Prime Minister of Pakistan Imran Khan has just arrived in Sri Lanka. These are the live images coming from Colombo. The plane carrying the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan, has just arrived in Colombo. He is in Colombo on a 2-day official visit, and this is the first visit of the Prime Minister after he took office to Sri Lanka. And he is being accompanied by foreign ministers and other business delegations as well. He is accompanied by the Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi. He is also accompanied by the Advisor on Commerce and Investment Abdul Razak Dawood, and Special Assistant on the Overseas Pakistanis Mr. Zulfikar Bukhari. During the visit, the Prime Minister will hold talks with Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his counterpart Mahinda Rajapaksa. These are the live images coming from Colombo. We can see the plane has just landed in Colombo Airport, and Prime Minister Imran Khan has just arrived. These are the live images coming from Colombo. Prime Minister is on a 2-day official visit to Sri Lanka, and at the high-level talks, the Prime Minister will be discussing the two sides of ways to promote bilateral cooperation in diverse fields, including trade, investment, health, education, agriculture, and science and technology. During the visit, The Prime Minister will hold talks with Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his counterpart Mahinda Rajapaksa. And you can see the live images coming from Colombo right now. The Prime Minister of Pakistan has arrived in Colombo. Pakistan's Prime Minister had left earlier for Sri Lanka on a two-day official visit on the invitation of his Lankan counterpart. And just to apprise the audience, this will be the Prime Minister's first visit to Colombo since assuming office in 2018. Live images coming on your screens from Colombo. The Prime Minister of Pakistan has arrived in Colombo on his official two-day visit. This is his first visit as Prime Minister after he assumed office in 2018 to Sri Lanka. The Prime Minister is accompanied by federal ministers, and the Prime Minister of Pakistan has arrived in Colombo. Pakistan's Prime Minister had left earlier for Sri Lanka on a two-day official visit on the invitation of his Lankan counterpart. And just to apprise the audience, this will be the Prime Minister's first visit to Colombo since assuming office in 2018. Live images coming on your screens from Colombo. The Prime Minister of Pakistan has arrived in Colombo on his official two-day visit. This is his first visit as Prime Minister after he assumed office in 2018 to Sri Lanka. The Prime Minister is accompanied by federal ministers and senior officials. The Foreign Office says Imran Khan will also meet President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and the bilateral talks will cover key regional and international issues as well as matters concerning trade and defense. Imran Khan is also scheduled to participate in a joint trade and investment conference. A number of memorandums of understandings will also be signed during the visit to enhance bilateral cooperation. Live images coming from Colombo. The Prime Minister is just arrived in Colombo, and he is there on a two-day official visit on the invitation of his counterpart Rajapaksa. The Prime Minister is accompanied by Foreign Minister Mr. Shah Mahmood Qureshi. He's also being accompanied by Advisor on Commerce and Investment, which is Mr. Abdul Razak Dawood, and also being accompanied by Special Assistant on Overseas Pakistanis, Mr. Zulfikar Bukhari. During the visit, the Prime Minister will also hold talks with Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his counterpart Mahinda Rajapaksa. High-level talks are expected between the two sides, and they will discuss ways to promote bilateral cooperation in diverse fields, including trade, investment, health, education, agriculture, and science and technology. As you can see live on your screens, images coming from Colombo International Airport. The Prime Minister has arrived in the Pakistan Air Force chartered plane, and he is there on a two-day official visit, and a guard of honor is planned, and he will be presented with that as soon as he steps out of the plane. These are the live images coming from Colombo. As we can see, children waiting the Prime Minister of Pakistan. And we can see finally some movement, I said, some break for the people who've been waiting to receive the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Prime Minister Imran Khan is on his first visit to Sri Lanka after assuming office in 2018. And the Prime Minister will also is also scheduled to hold and to participate in a joint trade and investment conference in Sri Lanka. Live images coming on your screens from Colombo. The Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan, has just landed in Colombo. Pakistan's Prime Minister, as you can see, has arrived in Sri Lanka on a two-day official visit on the invitation of his Lankan counterpart. This will be the Prime Minister's first visit to Colombo since assuming office in 2018. The Prime Minister is also accompanied by federal ministers and senior officials. The Foreign Office says Khan will also meet President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The bilateral talks will cover key regional and international issues as well as matters concerning to trade and defense. Imran Khan will also participate in a joint trade and investment conference. As you can see live images coming on your screens from Colombo, we can see people, delegations, high officials awaiting the Prime Minister. And now a number of memorandums of understandings will also be signed during the visit to enhance bilateral cooperation. As you can see, the Prime Minister is just walking down, is just coming down, and the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka is also there to receive Prime Minister Imran Khan. You can see live on your screens, Mahinda Rajapaksa is also present at this occasion. We can see live images coming from Colombo. The Prime Minister of Pakistan has just landed foot on the Colombo International Airport, and you can see both the counterparts, both the Prime Ministers on the screen. Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa, the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, is just, you can see them both walking now towards. And about this historic visit of Pakistan's Prime Minister to a friendly neighbor, Sri Lanka. Now, this is the first visit the Prime Minister has to Sri Lanka after assuming office in 2018. And this visit was on the invitation of his counterpart, Mr. Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Mahinda Rajapaksa. You can see live images coming from Colombo International Airport. The Prime Minister of Sri Lanka has received Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan. And during this visit, high-level talks are expected, and the two sides are also expected to discuss ways to promote bilateral cooperation in diverse fields, including trade, investment, health and education. And the Prime Minister has been welcomed in a traditional Sri Lankan style. And we also saw a guard of honor being presented earlier. And right now we can see both the leaders walking on the red carpet. And this is a historic and pretty important visit between the two friendly countries. Now, the Prime Minister of Pakistan is also accompanied by the Foreign Minister, Mr. Shah Mahmood Qureshi. He's also accompanied by the Advisor on Commerce and Investment, Mr. Abdul Razak Dawood, and also the Special Assistant on Overseas Pakistanis, Mr. Zulfikar Bukhari. The Prime Minister is also expected to hold and participate in a joint trade and investment conference. Now, just to remind, Pakistan and Sri Lanka have strong friendly relations since 1948. And the Prime Minister's visit will help further strengthen the bilateral relationship. And right now we can see on the screens a guard of honor being presented to the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan. And earlier Imran Khan left for Sri Lanka, and as we can see live images coming from Colombo, he just landed foot in Sri Lanka, a very friendly country and a very beautiful and a great friend. Well, those were the live images coming from Sri Lanka, and we can see live images coming right now from Sri Lanka. Prime Minister Imran Khan has landed foot, and he was just presented with the Guard of Honor, and the national anthems were also played now.
කාලතුවක්කු ආචාර වෙඩිමුර පාකිස්තානු අග්‍රාමාත්‍යතුමන්ට පෙරනැවීමට නියමිතයි.
இருநாட்டு தேசிய கீதமும் இசைக்கப்பட்டு இப்பொழுது பீரங்கி வேட்டுக்கள் தீர்க்கப்பட்டு ராணுவ மரியாதை இப்பொழுது பாகிஸ்தான் பிரதமருக்கு வழங்கப்படவிருக்கின்றது.
And right now you can see visuals. The Prime Minister of Pakistan is being also shown presented a salute of guns. We can see both the leaders right now in the picture, and we can see also a gun salute being presented to welcome the Prime Minister Imran Khan. This is a very warm welcome to a very warm friend. The relations between Sri Lanka and Pakistan have always been very strong, and the friendship and the bond has always been very courageous and of great importance. The relations of Sri Lanka and Pakistan have been pretty good since 1948, and just to remind our audiences watching Indus News right now from around the world, live images coming from Sri Lanka's capital Colombo, where the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan, has just landed. And right now on your screens, he can be seen the warm welcome by the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa. And earlier we also saw a guard of honor being presented to the Prime Minister Imran Khan. And right now you can see a gun salute being presented to the Prime Minister of Imran Khan. A very warm welcome by a very strong and great friend, Sri Lanka. And just to remind our audiences, Prime Minister Imran Khan is on a official visit to Sri Lanka, on a 2-day visit at the invitation of his Sri Lankan counterpart, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa. Live images coming on your screens. We can see Guard of Honor being presented to welcome the Prime Minister of Imran Khan. Indeed, a very warm and great welcome. And here's live images coming from Colombo. We can see Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan, walking through while he is being presented with a guard of honor. We can see Prime Minister right now on the red carpet. And according to the reports, the Prime Minister will hold talks with Sri Lankan leadership to further enhance bilateral cooperation in diverse sectors. The Prime Minister is also accompanied by a high-level delegation, which includes members of the cabinet and senior officials. Live images coming from Colombo. Prime Minister of Imran Khan can be seen right now walking on the red carpet, being welcomed by his Sri Lankan counterpart, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa. A very warm welcome indeed. He was earlier presented with a guard of honor and also a gun salute. And now this is a very, very warm welcome to the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan, by a very, very important and strong and great friend, Sri Lanka. And just to remind our audiences, this is the first visit of Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan, after he assumed office in 2018 to Sri Lanka. And this visit is on the invitation of the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa. And just to remind our audiences, live images coming from Sri Lanka, Colombo, I beg your pardon. The Prime Minister has just set foot, and he was earlier just being presented as a warm welcome, the guard of honor. He was also presented with a gun salute. As we can see both leaders right now in the picture. The national anthem is being played.
දැන් පාකිස්තානු අග්‍රාමාත්‍ය
Live images coming from Colombo Airport. Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan, has just landed in Colombo on the invitation of his counterpart, the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa. And we can see the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka introducing his cabinet and senior government officials to the Prime Minister of Imran Khan. Live images coming from Sri Lanka, as we can see both Prime Ministers in the screen. You can see live images on your screen sitting at home. Around the world, Prime Minister of Imran Khan is being welcomed now by the cabinet and senior government officials of the Sri Lankan government. Prime Minister Imran Khan is on a 2-day official visit to Sri Lanka on the invitation of his counterpart, the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Mahinda Rajapaksa. And we can also see the COVID-19 restrictions and the SOPs being followed by the government officials as of no handshake policy. Now, this is just to promote the fight against coronavirus as well. But just to remind our audiences, these are the live images coming from Colombo. Prime Minister Imran Khan has just landed foot in Sri Lanka. His first visit to Sri Lanka after he assumed office in 2018, and this visit is on the invitation of Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa. And as we can see, the Prime Minister is introducing his cabinet and senior government officials to the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa. And as we know, the Prime Minister is being accompanied by the Foreign Minister, Mr. Shah Mahmood Qureshi, is also being accompanied by the Advisor on Commerce and Investment, Mr. Abdul Razak Dawood, and also the Special Assistant on Overseas Pakistanis, Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bukhari. And live images coming from Sri Lanka, ladies and gentlemen. And as we can see, both leaders introduced the senior government officials and cabinet members, being accompanied by them to receive and accompanied by the Prime Minister on his tour to Sri Lanka, the first tour and a tour of great importance. And it is also expected that issues of mutual concerns, trade and defense is also likely to be discussed. And you can see both the leaders right now in the screen, on your screens. The Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan, and the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. And he is there. Live images coming from Sri Lanka. The Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, we can see as on the live images, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa. Now, as you can see, those were the images coming from Sri Lanka, where Pakistan's Prime Minister just arrived in Sri Lanka on 2-day official visit on the invitation of his Lankan counterpart. We will keep you updated with all the latest with this visit and other news from around the world. Keep watching Indus News.